Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, get ready to journey back, way back to the early Jurassic, because today we're zeroing in on a really fascinating dinosaur, Aardonyx celesti.
That's right. And for this deep dive, our main source is the original scientific description published by Yates and his colleagues back in 2010.
Right.
We'll also pull in some cladistic info that's basically the data that helps us map out evolutionary relationships from a more recent 2020 study by Rohote and others.
Okay, so our mission for you today is, well, pretty straightforward. We want to understand how Aardonyx gives us this incredibly clear glimpse into a huge turning point in dinosaur evolution.
Yeah, that shift from walking on two legs to becoming those giant four-legged sauropods we all picture.
Exactly. We're going to unpack the key features that make this particular dinosaur such a critical discovery. Okay, let's start with the name itself, Aardonyx. It just sounds ancient, doesn't it?
It really does. And the name's actually a mix. It comes from Africans and Greek.
Oh,
Yeah, Ardon means earth in Africans, and onyx is Greek for like a nail or claw.
so put them together. Earth claw.
You got it. Earth claw.
And there's a story behind that, I assume. It wasn't just picked out of a hat.
Definitely not. The species name, Celeste, that's a direct nod to Celeste Yates.
Mm.
She did a huge amount of the crucial early work, preparing the fossil bones so they could actually be studied properly.
That's fantastic. A great way to recognize that vital contribution. So where did this earth claw turn up? Where was it found?
Aardonyx was discovered by Adam Yates and his team. The location was the early Jurassic Elliott Formation in South Africa.
Okay, the Elliott Formation. I've heard of that. It's pretty famous for fossils from that time, right?
Exactly. It's a really rich layer for understanding that really important period in dinosaur history.
So this wasn't just, another fossil. It sounds like it made quite a splash in the paleontology community when it was announced.
Oh, it did. The paper went online in November 2009, quite a bit before the actual print version came out in March 2010 in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B.
That early release says something.
It does. It shows you how significant people thought the discovery was, right from the start. Even paleontologists who weren't on the research team immediately recognized its importance.
Like, Paul Barrett, I think I read his comments.
Precisely. Paul Barrett, the British paleontologist, he pointed out that Aardonyx was, well, crucial. It helps fill a really noticeable gap in how we understood sauropod evolution.
How so?
It showed, pretty clearly, how a dinosaur that mostly walked on two legs could start developing the kinds of features needed for a life on all fours. And this is where it starts getting really interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, we're talking about a dinosaur almost caught in the act of transforming. So who was this Aardonyx? What do we know about the individuals?
Well, we know it from the bones of two different individuals. And what's really interesting is that these weren't full-grown adults. They were immature, probably less than 10 years old when they died.
Less than 10. How can
Yeah.
you tell their age from fossils? No birthday candles, I assume.
Huh? No, not quite. The clues are actually embedded in the bones. When the researchers looked closely, they didn't find peripheral rest lines in the outer layers, the cortices, of the bones.
Okay, what are those?
Think of them like tree rings, but for bone growth. Their absence suggests the animals were still actively growing, hadn't reached full size.
Ah, I see.
And there was another clue. They found calcified cartilage, that's cartilage, that was hardening into bone at the end of the scapula, the shoulder blade. That's another telltale sign of an animal that's still developing.
So basically, we're looking at dinosaur teenagers or maybe even preteens, and they found a decent amount of their skeletons, didn't they? Not just a single bone.
Oh yes, the material's pretty good. It includes bits of the skull, vertebrae from the neck and back, ribs, gastralia, those are sometimes called belly ribs,
Right.
chevrons from the tail, bits of the shoulder and hip girdles, and then bones from both the front and back legs, including parts of the hands and feet.
Wow, quite a lot. But they were scattered, not like a complete skeleton lying there.
Correct. They were disarticulated. The bones were mixed up, not connected as they would have been in life.
And the way they were found all jumbled together, that tells a story too, right?
Exactly. The fact that you have all these bones from two individuals packed together in this one specific spot, a sort of channel-filled deposit, it strongly suggests a single event. Maybe it's something like a flash flood washed them together and buried them quickly.
Okay, so we have these two youngsters buried together. Now let's really get into why they're such an evolutionary goldmine. You said it's a transitional form. How does it bridge that gap between two legs and four?
It's really apparent in the arms. Aardonyx's arms have features that are, well, smack in the middle. They're intermediate between the earliest sauropodomorphs, The ancestors mostly two-legged.
More primitive ones.
Yes, exactly. And the later, more derived, fully four-legged true sauropods. It's like you can see the blending of old and new designs in one animal.
A bit of this, a bit of that. What about the legs and hips? Do they show this in-between stage too?
They did. The structure of the hind limbs and the pelvic girdle, it points to Aardonyx being primarily bipedal. It usually walked on two legs.
Okay.
But crucially, it also had features suggesting it could move quadrupedally, using all fours when needed. A bit like how we think iguanodon might have moved.
Ah, facultative quadrupedalism.
Sort of, yeah. And fascinatingly, in some respects, it even shows early hints of features we see much later in the giant sauropods like Apatosaurus.
So not locked into one mode. It had options, which makes a lot of sense for a creature right in the middle of such a major evolutionary shift. Let's zoom in on the movement then. Evidence for two legs, but hints of four. What are the specific clues?
Okay, for the habitual bipedalism, look at the forearm bones, the radius and ulna. Their structure actually limited how much it could pronate its hand.
Pronate, like turning your palm down.
Exactly. That limited rotation is more typical of animals that mostly walk bipedally. And there's the limb proportions, too. The humerus, the upper arm bone, was quite a bit shorter than the femur, the thigh bone, only about 72% of the length.
72%. That's a big difference. Shorter arms would suggest it wasn't relying on them for walking most of the time, right?
Precisely. A good indicator of its bipedal ancestry. But then you see the signs of change.
Okay, so what started nudging it towards using all four?
Several things in the forearm. The ulna, one of those forearm bones, had what's called an incipient craniolateral process.
Incipient, meaning just starting.
Yeah, just beginning to develop. This little bump started giving the ulna a faint Y shape. That Y shape becomes much more pronounced in sauropodomorphs that were obligate quadrupeds, the ones that had to walk on four legs.
Interesting.
And there's more. The radius, the other forearm bone, was shifted a bit forward cranially, and the ulna developed a little hollow, a radial fossa, to kind of cradle the radius.
Okay, so those changes together, they made the forearm better for.
Better for bearing weight. They suggest the forelimbs were starting to adapt for supporting the body, not just grasping or balancing.
Wow. Tiny changes in bone shape telling a huge story. What about how it walked? The gait? Did that change too?
Looks like it. Certain features in the hind limbs suggest it probably moved a bit slower than its more primitive bipedal relatives.
Slower. Why?
Well, the shaft of the femur, the thigh bone, was straighter, and the fourth trochanter, that's a bony ridge where big tail muscle attached.
Yeah, the muscle that pulls the leg back.
Exactly, the M. cauda-femoralis longus. That attachment point was positioned further down the bone, more distally.
Okay, hang on. Why does moving the muscle attachment down the leg matter for speed?
Think of it like leverage. Placing the attachment further down gives that muscle more leverage, more power for pulling the leg back, like using a longer lever.
Okay. More power.
But usually greater leverage comes at the cost of speed. You can't retract the leg as quickly. So Aardonyx probably had strong leg retraction, but maybe wasn't winning any races.
Power over speed? Maybe that's a necessary trade-off if you're starting to support more weight potentially on four legs sometime?
That seems like a very logical interpretation, yes. And there's more evidence down in the feet. Yeah. The metatarsals, those are the long bones in the middle part of the foot, between the ankle and toes. They were quite robust, thick and strong. And this suggests the way it bore weight through its foot was changing. It was shifting towards the inside edge of the foot, becoming more medial, or what we call entaxonic.
Entaxonic, so weight on the inner toes, like towards the big toe side.
Pretty much, yeah. That's a big contrast to the earlier guys, the more basal sauropodomorphs. They tended to be mesaxonic, with the weight concentrated down the middle toe.
And why is that shift inwards, that entaxony, so important?
It points towards a wider stance, maybe? And it's definitely something we see in the later, heavier sauropods.
Yeah.
It provides better support. So seeing it in Aardonyx, along with those strong metatarsals, is another strong indicator of this move toward quadrupedalism.
And that challenges older ideas.
It does. The thinking used to be that this kind of foot structure, entaxony, evolved later, maybe around the time of dinosaurs like Volcanodon.
Yeah.
But Aardonyx shows it was already starting to happen earlier. It's rewriting the timeline a bit.
Wow. So Aardonyx isn't just transitional, it's actually changing our understanding of when certain transitions happened. Okay, let's shift from movement to food. Another huge part of sauropod evolution is their immense size and how they ate enough to sustain it. Did Aardonyx show signs of changing its diet or feeding style?
Absolutely. You definitely see steps towards that classic sauropod bulk browsing strategy. Although Maybe not exactly how you'd expect.
Oh, how so?
Well, its jaws were still relatively narrow and V-shaped, and the symphysis, where the two halves of the lower jaw meet at the chin, was pointed. That V shape is more of an ancestral trait, something you see in the earlier guys.
Right, not the big, wide, U-shaped shovel mouths of later sauropods.
Exactly. Those wide jaws were great for scooping up massive amounts of vegetation.
Yeah,
Aardonyx wasn't quite there yet with the jaw shape, but
but
get this, it seems to have lost its fleshy cheeks.
lost its cheeks. How do we know that?
There's a feature, a lateral ridge, on the back part of the dentary, the main lower jawbone. Most plant eaters with cheeks have this ridge as an attachment point. Aardonyx doesn't have it.
Huh.
And supporting that idea, the little holes in the upper jawbone, the maxilla, the neurovascular foramanina, they're quite small.
Meaning less blood flow.
Probably less blood supply going to the tissues on the side of the face. So less blood suggests less tissue there, supporting the idea of no fleshy cheeks.
Okay, so goodbye dinosaur cheeks. Why lose them? What's the advantage?
It allows for a much wider gape. You can open your mouth incredibly wide without cheeks getting in the way.
Ah, to grab bigger mouthfuls of leaves and stuff.
Precisely. A key step towards bulk browsing. You're prioritizing getting large volumes of food in, even if you're not processing it much in the mouth.
Okay, but if you don't have cheeks, how do you stop the food from just falling out the sides?
Good question. Aardonyx seems to have compensated by developing bony plates, lateral plates, along the inside edges of its tooth rows. These plates would have helped brace the teeth and maybe kept some of the food contained while it was stripping foliage off branches.
Clever. So a wider gape instead of cheeks, using bony plates for support. It's like it traded chewing efficiency for intake volume.
That's a great way to put it, a fundamental shift. But here's the really surprising part you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
This combination, the ancestral V-shaped jaw, but the advanced feature of no cheeks is unusual.
How so?
Because the previous thinking, based on other fossils, was sort of the opposite. For example, there's another early sauropodomorph, a bit more advanced than Aardonyx perhaps, called Chinchaqueongosaurus. It seems to have had the wide U-shaped jaw, but still had fleshy cheeks.
Wait, so Chinchaqueongosaurus got the wide jaw first but kept the cheeks, while Aardonyx kept the narrow jaw but lost the cheeks.
Exactly. It's completely flipped from what you might expect if it was a simple linear progression.
That's fascinating. So evolution wasn't following a neat checklist.
Not at all.
Mm.
It strongly suggests that this wide, cheekless gape adaptation for bulk browsing might have actually evolved more than once, independently, within the wider sauropodomorph group.
Wow.
Yeah, maybe once on the branch leading towards Aardonyx, and then again separately on the branch leading to sauropods, more advanced than Chinchaqueongosaurus.
That's a brilliant example of what parallel evolution, convergent evolution, similar solutions popping up independently. Okay, let's try and pin down where Aardonyx sits on the big family tree. Phylogenetics. Where do the studies place it?
Right. Well, the original 2010 analysis by Yates and his team placed Aardonyx as the sister taxon. That means its closest relative to a specific group, or clade.
Okay, sister taxon to what?
To the clade containing Melanorosaurus plus all of Sauropoda proper. And the key thing there is that Melanorosaurus and all those sauropods were obligate quadrupeds. They had to walk on four legs.
So Aardonyx is positioned right before that full commitment to quadrupedalism.
Exactly. There are specific shared features, derived traits in their vertebrae and their limb skeletons that support putting Aardonyx in that crucial spot just outside the group of fully four-legged giants.
Makes sense. Now, what about that 2020 study you mentioned earlier, the Rauhut one? Did it broadly agree or place it somewhere different?
It's slightly different, as these things often are when new data comes in. The 2020 analysis places Aardonyx within a larger group called Massopoda. The exact branching pattern might differ a little, but the overall picture is similar.
Which is
That Aardonyx is a relatively advanced early sauropodomorph, definitely closely related to the lineage that ultimately gave rise to the true sauropods. It's still highlighting that key transitional position. It just shows how scientists are constantly refining these relationships as we find more fossils and develop new analytical techniques.
right. The puzzle pieces keep getting shifted around slightly as we find more. Okay, one last area. You mentioned the growth patterns from their bones. What did the histology, the microscopic structure, tell us about how these youngsters grew?
The osteohistology showed they grew rapidly, which isn't too surprising for dinosaurs on the line to becoming giants, but that growth wasn't constant.
Not constant.
No, there were signs of seasonal interruptions. You could see regular growth marks within the bone tissue, suggesting periods where growth slowed down or paused, maybe during dry seasons or tougher times.
Okay, like tree rings again?
Sort of, yeah. And earlier in their development, like when they were really young, their bones showed structures called fibrolamellar complexes. That type of bone tissue is strongly associated with very fast initial growth rates.
So a fast start, maybe hitting growth spurts when conditions were good, but with seasonal pauses along the way. That sounds biologically plausible, doesn't it?
Very much so. It fits with what we see in many other dinosaurs and large animals today.
Well, we have certainly covered a lot of ground on Aardonyx Celeste. This has been fascinating. Let's try and sum up some of the key takeaways.
Absolutely. I mean, the big picture is that Aardonyx is just a hugely significant transitional fossil. It gives us this fantastic window into the shift from primarily bipedal ancestors to the fully quadrupedal sauropod giants.
Right. We saw that in the limbs, didn't we? Those intermediate features hinting at the changing posture and way of moving.
Exactly. And then there are the feeding adaptations, that really surprising mix of an older style V-shaped jaw,
Mm.
but without fleshy cheeks, showing an early, maybe unexpected step towards that bulk browsing lifestyle.
Yeah, and the fact that these features didn't necessarily appear in the sequence we might have predicted, that really challenges some older ideas about how sauropods evolved, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It shows evolution isn't always a simple straight line.
And that, I think, brings us to the aha moment for you, the listener. The fact that these evolutionary changes, like in the feeding structures, didn't happen in a neat step-by-step order, that's a perfect example of how science works. New discoveries can genuinely reshape our understanding of the past.
Hmm.
It reminds you that evolution is often way more complex, more messy, and frankly more surprising than we might first think. It's just amazing that these subtle clues in fossil bones can reveal so much about such a massive evolutionary transition.
It really is. And it leaves you with a really interesting thought to chew on. Given Aardonyx's unique, maybe slightly unexpected blend of characteristics, what other kinds of early sauropodomorphs might still be out there waiting to be discovered?
Good question.
Creatures we haven't even imagined yet. How might finding them further change or refine our picture of this absolutely pivotal time in dinosaur evolution? Maybe even comparing those slightly different family trees from the 2010 and 2020 studies could spark some more thinking about just how intricate these evolutionary pathways really were.